President Trump in Paris considers inviting Vladimir Putin to the White House. Questions swirl over how and why a Russian lawyer was allowed into the U.S. to begin with and who she's associated with. And Republicans count heads as they drop another version of their Obamacare replacement. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. Senate Republicans trot out another Obamacare repeal and replace bill, and some of their colleagues waste no time in running away from it. Getting the bill to the Senate floor for debate may even be a challenge. More on that story in just a moment. First up, President Trump's visit to France for Bastille Day ceremonies did not get him far enough away from the international press corps to escape more questions about Russia and his son's dealings with a Russian lawyer. Tonight, we're learning that lawyer was in the U.S. after direct involvement from a familiar name, Loretta Lynch, who would become President Obama's Attorney General, of course, a connection President Trump made very sure the world heard today. Let's start off tonight with Chief White House correspondent John Roberts traveling with the president in the City of Lights. Good evening, John.
And good morning to you, Brett, and the traditional top-of-the-hour light show from the Eiffel Tower going on behind me. President Trump did not shy away today from addressing the firestorm of controversy surrounding his namesake eldest son, and also raised questions about how and why the woman his son met with was even in the country. President Trump faced the press this afternoon for the first time since news broke that his son Don Jr. had met with a Russian attorney he thought was looking to peddle damaging information about Hillary Clinton.
My son is a wonderful young man. He took a meeting with a Russian lawyer. It was a meeting that went very, very quickly, very fast.
The president dismissed the notion that Trump Jr. had done anything wrong, saying nothing came of the meeting, insisting that any political campaign worth its salt would have done the same thing.
It's called opposition research. I've had many people call up, oh, gee, we have information on this factor or this person or, frankly, Hillary. That's very standard in politics.
The president also pointed fingers at the press, arguing that the incident had been overblown, blaming the Obama administration for the fact the Russian attorney, Natalia Veselnitskaya, was in the country at all.
The lawyer that went to the meeting, I say that she was in the halls of Congress also. Somebody said that her visa or her passport to come into the country was approved by Attorney General Lynch.
When asked about the Trump Jr. matter, the president's host, French President Emmanuel Macron, deferred, saying it's not his practice to interfere in others' domestic life.
What a good answer that is.
President Trump's meetings with Macron were buoyed by the historic ties that bind the two countries. The two leaders took a tour of French military history at Les Invalides and visited the tomb of France's greatest military leader, Napoleon Bonaparte. But there are also thorny issues that divide the two leaders, beginning with the president's announcement to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
I very much respect the decision taken by President Trump. He will work upon implementing his campaign promises. Next, should that have an impact on the discussions we are having on all other topics? No, absolutely not.
President Trump appeared to indicate that pulling out of the accord may not be an absolute.
Something could happen with respect to the Paris Accord. We will talk about that over the coming period of time. And if it happens, that'll be wonderful. And if it doesn't, that'll be okay, too.
The president today defended his efforts to forge a better relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin at last week's G20, pointing to initial success with the Syrian ceasefire.
By having some communication and dialogue, we were able to have a ceasefire, and it's going to go on for a while. And frankly, we're working on a second ceasefire in a very rough part of Syria. And if we get that and a few more, all of a sudden you're going to have no bullets being fired in Syria.
And while President Trump has faced withering criticism over his desire to rebuild the U.S.-Russian relationship, Macron thought it was a no-brainer, revealing that he's doing it too.
We have a lot of disagreements. We have a lot of discrepancies, obviously, with Russia. But in the current environment, especially in the Middle East, It's a necessity to work together, to exchange information, to share these agreements, and to try to build solutions.
Aboard Air Force One on his way to Paris, President Trump revealed that he would consider inviting the Russian president to the White House for a visit. The president did say that the time would have to be right and that now is not the time. But to not invite the leader, he said, would be, quote, stupid. Brett?
John Roberts, live in Paris, just after midnight. John, thanks. Now, new details on how that Russian lawyer made it into the U.S. and was allowed to stay so long, and who she connected to. Here's Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge.
Court records and transcripts reviewed by Fox News show the Russian lawyer at the center of the Donald Trump Jr. emails was granted a special immigration status by the Obama administration Justice Department, as first reported by the Hill newspaper. Natalia Veselnitskaya was the lawyer for a Russian businessman, Denis Katsyev, accused by federal prosecutors of laundering hundreds of millions of dollars in real estate transactions. The government bypassed the normal visa process and gave a type of extraordinary permission to enter the country called immigration parole, the documents state. That's a discretionary act that the statute allows the Attorney General to do in extraordinary circumstances. Democrats say Republicans may be overplaying their hand.
Clearly, someone in the United States government had to make an exception. And what we've learned, or what has been reported, is that that was granted in order to allow her to come to the United States to defend her client in a major international trial in New York. That seems like a reasonable use of the parole option.
After the June Trump Tower meeting with Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and then campaign chairman Paul Manafort, Veselnitskaya heads to Capitol Hill, where she can be seen in the background of this House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing. It's not clear what her immigration or parole status is at the time. Next week, one of the witnesses testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee says Veselnitskaya also ran a robust campaign to repeal the Magnitsky Act that levied sanctions on Russian officials implicated in the death of an anti-corruption investigator. Bill Browder says the Russian lawyer hired Fusion GPS, the same firm connected to the unverified
of lobbyists, public relations people, and others. The firms that they took on as part of this campaign to have Magnitsky Act repealed was a firm in Washington, D.C. called Fusion GPS.
The person who brought the dossier to the attention of Senator John McCain last fall, former British Ambassador Sir Andrew Wood, now emphasizes to Fox News that he could not vouch for the material. In an email exchange, Wood said, "I understood that its general contents were known to others in the United States." The senator then arranged for the papers to be brought to him. It was up to the senator to decide what action, if any, he took throughout the whole process.
Senator McCain's office did not immediately respond tonight, but in a January statement, McCain said he reviewed the dossier, could not make a judgment about its accuracy, and then passed the file to then FBI Director James Comey. Grassley's office recently told Fox News the FBI has not responded to their request for more information. Brett.
Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
The Justice Department is taking down a massive healthcare fraud scam that totaled more than $1 billion in false bidding. Hundreds of healthcare providers have been suspended, banned from participating in federal programs, or even arrested. Correspondent Kevin Cork has details.
We are sending a clear message to criminals across this country. We will find you, we will bring you to justice, and you will pay a very high price for what you have done.
It was the largest healthcare fraud takedown in U.S. history. 412 defendants charged, including 56 doctors, caught in a web of deceit and greed that U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions said cost American taxpayers over $1 billion and ruined countless lives.
These people inflicted a special kind of damage. Some doctors wrote out more prescriptions for controlled substances in 1 month than entire hospitals were writing.
The bust comes as the United States struggles with an opioid epidemic that has seen the number of drug overdoses quadruple since 1999. Consider in 2014, over 47,000 Americans died of drug overdoses, most in U.S. history in a single year, 61% of which were opioid related. That's more than the number of people who died in car crashes that year or were killed by gun violence.
49 innocent people were murdered at the Pulse nightclub by a madman. Now imagine that happening 3 times a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and once in the evening. And then imagine that happening 365 days in a row.
Congress has made tackling the opioid issue a priority, passing the 21st Century Cures Act in December, which sets aside $1 billion over 2 years for the fight. But experts worry that today's arrests are only the tip of the iceberg.
The vast majority of healthcare providers are honest and do what they need to do for their patients, but it only takes a small number to really have a negative impact on the entire system.
Now, critics charge the White House simply hasn't done enough to combat the problem. You may remember it was back in March. The president actually created a commission to study opioid abuse and its effect on the country and more effective ways the government could deal with that. But since that time, the panel has yet to release a report. That panel, by the way, headed by New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. More work yet to be done, Brett.
Okay, Kevin, thank you. Reaction is coming in tonight to the latest attempt by Senate Republicans to repeal and replace Obamacare. And it appears a consensus remains elusive at this hour. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel reports on the continued internal dissent over their top agenda item.
Vice President Mike Pence is trying to close the deal and deliver a major legislative victory on health care reform.
And we will finally give the American people the kind of world-class health care that they deserve, built on the American principles of freedom, free market choices, and state-based reform.
The revised bill was released today and features some changes from the original plan. An additional $70 billion for states to create their own reforms. Health savings accounts can be used to pay for premiums. An additional $45 billion to battle the opioid epidemic. And the ability to buy cheaper plans with less coverage for those who want it. Something conservatives like Senator Ted Cruz have been pushing.
If we're lowering premiums, it's a win for everyone. And this draft now has two major provisions. One, consumer freedom. But the second is allowing people to use health savings accounts to pay for premiums.
Kentucky Senator Rand Paul remains a critic of the bill, saying it maintains too much of what Republicans promised to repeal.
It keeps about half of the Obamacare taxes, keeps most of the Obamacare regulations, keeps most of the Obamacare subsidies, and it creates a giant insurance bailout superfund.
Senator Susan Collins of Maine announced on Twitter that, like Senator Paul, she will oppose Majority Leader McConnell even taking up the bill, what is known as the motion to proceed. Collins tweeted, "Still deep cuts to Medicaid and Senate bill. Will vote no on MTP. Ready to work with GOP and Dem colleagues to fix flaws in the Affordable Care Act." Another moderate, Ohio Senator Rob Portman, says he's undecided on the motion to proceed. If Portman is a no, then McConnell would be stuck again. Arizona Senator John McCain expressed pessimism.
It should have gone through the committees of oversight so that the Democrats had a role to play, and then we probably could have gotten this thing done. Now I think prospects are dim.
Democrats are opposed, with some using colorful language.
This proposal is, in effect, lipstick on a pig. It's cosmetic changes to a fundamentally flawed, cruel, and costly proposal.
Although there's a great deal of tension, Republican Senator Cory Gardner tried to lighten things up when asked about today's closed-door meeting.
There were 3 fist fights and 1 chair thrown.
Despite those early defections from Collins and Paul, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell told us late today the Senate will be voting next week. A number of other Republicans have told me they feel a sense of urgency. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on Capitol Hill. Mike, thanks. Let's talk about health care and also the Russia investigation with Virginia Democrat Senator Mark Warner, who joins us from Capitol Hill tonight. He's the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator, thanks for being here tonight. I want to get your reaction to President Trump in Paris. When he said this, he was asked about his son's meeting with that Russian lawyer.
He took a meeting with a lawyer from Russia. It lasted for a very short period, and nothing came of the meeting. And I think it's a meeting that most people in politics probably would have taken.
Your thoughts on that?
I think that the president, frankly, I can't believe what he's saying. I mean, here was in black and white an email that said
hey, meet with this Russian lawyer acting as an agent of the Russian government, and this is part of the Russian government's effort to help then candidate Trump and to discredit Clinton. I don't know anybody, Democrat or Republican, that would take that kind of meeting with not only a foreign government, but a foreign adversary, and frankly, a government that we've learned was trying to hack into our whole electoral process, and frankly, fairly successfully was able to interfere.
With that meeting, what is the underlying crime you think there is there?
Well, I'm not saying there was an underlying crime. That's what our bipartisan investigation in the Senate Intelligence Committee is looking into. But the idea that the Trump officials, which since the election have said, hey, we've not been meeting with Russians until there's been evidence that they have been meeting, and you've had the firing of the NSA Director General Flynn, you've had the recusal of the Attorney General, you've had now Mr. Kushner have to amend 3 times his filings, or at least 3 separate meetings that were not disclosed. What happened here was there was an effort in the email that said this is part of the Russian government effort to help, said Mr. Trump. That, in my mind, is totally inappropriate, and you just don't meet with foreign governments, and particularly governments that are adversarial to our country in this kind of affair. Now,
Senator, what about besides the email here that obviously you allude to, that you say, and it's clear, that talks about at least attempted collusion, are there other instances where you have seen evidence of collusion beyond this one meeting?
Well, Brett, what we have not done so far in this investigation, because we've spent a lot of time, frankly, on the firing of Jim Comey and getting him in to testify, getting the Attorney General in to testify, we are just now starting to talk. Though we're affiliated with the Trump campaign, that at least have been mentioned in the press, like Paul Manafort, like Carter Page, like Roger Stone. We've not talked to any of them yet, but they have been mentioned in the press as having contacts with Russians. We need to figure out whether those contacts were appropriate or not, but we haven't talked to them, so there would be no evidence yet because we haven't had those kind of conversations.
What about what you know about this attorney, Natalia Veselnitskaya, how she came into the country, who she's tied to? Have you gone down that road?
Brett, I don't have full information. I have, what's black and white in the email chain involving her, involving the British intermediary and Donald Trump Jr. And what I have is what's been reported in the press, that this is a lawyer that has been a big advocate of changing certain policies in favor of the Russian government. Right. But we don't have a full background on her.
She's tied to this group Fusion GPS, which is also tied to that dossier, which got so much coverage. Have you verified anything in the dossier?
What I have seen is that there have been indications that the individual that put together the dossier, Christopher Steele, had been a British agent of, I believe, MI5, and that I've seen reports that the American government viewed that agent as credible. I do not believe, and this is, I think, what probably the FBI and Special Prosecutor Mueller are investigating, are seeing whether those accusations that were the sources of that dossier pan out to be true or not.
Right, but you can't verify independently.
No, yeah. I cannot verify at this point. Listen, I would love at some point to be able to talk to Christopher Steele, who was a long-term agent of the British government and had been viewed by the American government as at least credible.
So do you know how much the FBI paid for the dossier?
All I know is what's been reported in the press was that the initial reports were that that Mr. Steele was hired by actually a Republican operative who was trying to then discredit Mr. Trump during the Republican primary process.
Do you know, or do you stand behind Congressman Schiff, who read a lot of this dossier that was really unconfirmed into the congressional record?
Listen, what I would say is I don't know the veracity of the dossier or not. I know that it was done by a long-term agent of the British government, one of our allies, and I know that this agent was viewed as at least credible by the American government.
Understanding
the truth or non-truth of the claims made in the dossier, and there have been some claims that were quite salacious. There were other claims that indicated that the government had some ability to influence Mr. Trump.
Understanding that the special counsel has a job to do, you all have a job to do with the investigation. What do you say to people at home who say, man, this is a lot, and I don't care about this. I care about my job and my health care and what is going to be on my table. Even people in Virginia who wonder about that.
Well, what I'd say, Brett, is what we know, and we know this not because I say it, but because the unanimous opinion of the intelligence community was that the Russian government, in an effort to try to sow discord in our political process, hacked into both political parties, decided they would release information that would be helpful to Mr. Trump, hurtful to Hillary Clinton. In addition to that, they tried to at least hack into, and while they didn't change any vote totals, at least prodded into 21 different states' electoral systems. They did those activities in America. They did similar activities in France, where actually Facebook took down 30,000 fake news sites that were propagating fake news, and that their chances are the Russians are going to also intervene in the German elections. And if you take what they did in the American elections, the French elections, what they will do in the German elections, their effort is to sow discord. I'm not here to relitigate what happened in 2016. I'm here to make sure that our electoral process are safe going forward. And I think anyone, whether you're a supporter of Mr. Trump or whether you're a supporter of the Democrats, ought to find out what happened. And what bothers me, Brett, is if you add up what the Russians spent in American elections, French elections, what they'll spend in the German elections, double it, it's probably less than 5% of the cost of a new aircraft carrier. And I feel that we're looking at 21st century cyber warfare, and we have to be better protected.
Well, Senator, we appreciate your time. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you so much, Brett.
Still ahead, the parents of a terminally ill child begged for permission to try to save his life, plus a chilling confession in the case of 4 missing men as a grisly scene is uncovered. This is a Fox News alert, a confession in Pennsylvania. Authorities say the man they have in custody now in connection with 4 missing young men has admitted to killing them. Senior correspondent Rick Leventhal is in Pennsylvania tonight. Good evening, Rick.
Good evening, Brett. This news broke within the last hour outside a courthouse where a grand jury had been convened to consider charges against Cosmo DiNardo, the 20-year-old sole person of interest in the case of those 4 young men who disappeared and might have been murdered. The attorney for DiNardo walked out of that courthouse and walked up to reporters and said, in fact, that DiNardo had confessed to participation in the murders of those 4 young men and told authorities where the bodies were. What isn't clear yet is whether that means he may have had help or is claiming that he did. His attorney says the confession came in exchange for an agreement by the DA not to pursue the death penalty in this case. Of course, investigators, local police, and the FBI's evidence response team have been at DiNardo's parents' 90-acre farm all week searching for clues, and they dug a huge pit on the property after cadaver dogs alerted to possible bodies there. And last night at midnight, the DA announced they had uncovered a mass grave some 12.5 feet down and positively identified the remains of 19-year-old Dean Finocchiaro. The DA confirmed that other remains were in the grave, but couldn't yet say if they belonged to the other 3 missing: 19-year-old Jimmy Taro Patrick, 22-year-old Mark Sturgis, and 21-year-old Tom Mayo. Tonight it appears that the family's worst fears have been realized, and Cosmo DiNardo, who was already being held in Bucks County Jail on $5 million bail for stealing a car belonging to one of those missing men, has now apparently confessed to killing all 4 of them. On his way out of the court, as reporters shouted questions at him, he said, "I'm sorry." Brett?
Rick Leventhal live there as this story develops. Rick, thank you. Another breaking news story tonight. House Majority Whip Steve Scalise has undergone another surgery. MedStar Washington Hospital reports the procedure was for the management of deep tissue infection related to the bullet wounds he suffered last month during that shooting at a congressional baseball practice. Scalise's condition has been changed from serious to fair. In response to the shooting, the Federal Election Commission voted today to permit House members to use up to $15,000 of their own campaign money for security purposes at their homes. We may learn tomorrow whether a British couple will be allowed to bring their terminally ill child here to America on one final mission of mercy. They laid out their case in court again today in Great Britain. Correspondent Ryan Chilcote has the story from London tonight.
Charlie Gard's parents arrived at Britain's High Court seeking permission to take their son to the U.S. for experimental treatment. When it was all over, they slipped out the back door, hoping for a ruling tomorrow.
Let's pray that British justice, that is known throughout the world for being fair, for being decent and for being compassionate, comes through for baby Charlie.
Charlie Gard suffers from mitochondrial depletive syndrome, a rare, typically terminal disease that has left him deaf, blind, unable to swallow, move, or even breathe without life support. His London hospital, revered as one of the world's best for kids, says his ventilator should be turned off. Any further treatment, they say, would only put the boy in pain. Inside the courtroom, via video link, new evidence was presented by the family. Testimony from an expert telling the judge a New York hospital's experimental treatment is worth trying and would offer a 10% chance of improving the boy's quality of life. Charlie's parents have brought their argument to nearly every court in the land. It has been an emotionally charged campaign. Twice today, out of the sight of cameras, Charlie's parents stormed out of the courtroom. The case parallels the case of Terry Schiavo, the right-to-die legal fight in Florida that pitted family against the courts, and it has drawn the interest of President Trump and the Pope. The judge today said the hospital staff treating Charlie had faced vile abuse and threats and called for that retaliation to come to an end. Perhaps the case will come to an end tomorrow with a decision. Brett?
Ryan Chilcote in London. Ryan, thank you. The State Department here in the U.S. is making more demands to foreign countries about providing traveler information for people coming to the U.S. Correspondent Rich Edson has the latest from Foggy Bottom tonight. Good evening, Rich.
Good evening, Brett. And this is part of the Trump administration's controversial extreme vetting policy for those trying to visit the United States. The State Department is now requiring all countries to provide thorough information for those applying for a U.S. visa. The department is giving countries 50 days to comply or show progress. If not, the U.S. could restrict travel from their country. The department details this information in a cable it sent all U.S. diplomatic posts. Reuters first reported it, and a senior State Department official has confirmed it to Fox News. The memo notes, quote, "This is the first time that the U.S. government is setting standards for the information that is required from all countries, specifically in support of immigration and traveler vetting. They require countries to provide information the U.S. might request, like biometric and personal details. It also demands countries plan to issue electronic passports to their citizens and ensure they report lost or stolen travel documents to safeguard against extremists using them to enter the United States. And if the government decides to deport a foreign citizen, the cable says the U.S. expects that country will take them back." Another State Department official tells Fox News that the U.S. will work with foreign governments to design a plan to comply. Also asks diplomats to, quote, "underscore that while it is not our goal to impose a ban on immigration benefits, including visas for citizens of any country, these standards are designed to mitigate risks." It also asks countries, Brett, to avoid placing their citizens on any type of watch list because of their political or religious beliefs. Brett?
Rich Edson live at the State Department. Rich, thank you. Bipartisan agreement in the House tonight on a bill to expand college aid for military veterans. The deal calls for greater flexibility in allowing veterans to wait before going back to school. It also provides up to $2,300 a year in additional tuition coverage. We could be about to enter a new era in medicine. A Food and Drug Administration panel has voted to recommend the agency approve the first gene therapy available in the U.S. Researchers have developed a one-time treatment for children and young adults with advanced leukemia. It works by removing immune cells from a patient's blood, reprogramming them to recognize and destroy cancer, then injecting them back into that patient. An FDA decision is expected by the end of September. On the markets, the Dow rose 21, a record high close again. The S&P 500 was up 5, the Nasdaq jumped 13. Now another story about how the city of Seattle continues to defy political convention. Residents there are being given vouchers to use in campaign financing. As with most things, not everyone thinks this new idea is a good idea. Correspondent Dan Springer is in Seattle tonight.
Well, my name is John Grant.
John Grant is running a completely new type of campaign for Seattle City Council. He's asking virtually every person he meets to become a financial donor.
And we're funding our campaign through the Democracy Voucher Program.
Each registered voter was mailed 4 $25 vouchers, which can only be redeemed by candidates. Grant, a housing activist who's endorsed by the Democratic Socialist Party, has raised over $200,000, nearly all from vouchers given by some of the most unlikely campaign donors, low-income renters, non-citizens, and the homeless, all who can apply for vouchers even if they can't or won't vote.
Someone who's homeless has just as many democracy vouchers as someone who's wealthy and living on a waterfront property in Seattle.
The vouchers are funded by a small property tax, raising $3 million, just a few weeks from the primary, and only 4% have been returned. Unused voucher money will roll over to the next election cycle. But Mark Elster hopes to prevent that. Not able to support a single candidate, Elster is suing to stop the program because he says his tax dollars are funding political speech he opposes.
It's a clear violation of First Amendment rights. With free speech also comes the right not to speak.
We're also participating in the Democracy Voucher Program.
One goal is to reduce the amount and influence of money in politics. In exchange for getting vouchers, candidates like Teresa Mosqueda agreed to a spending cap. But it may not work. She got limits lifted because opponent Sarah Nelson, who opted out of the vouchers, is raising lots of private money. Voucher supporters say this first-in-the-nation program gives political voice to those who have never given to a campaign before and forces candidates to get out and meet more voters. But critics contend this is just another money grab that will push Seattle's politics further to the left. Brett?
Dan, thank you. Up next, the panel on President Trump in France, the Russia scandal, and a lot more that follows him everywhere. Stay with us.
My son is a wonderful young man. He took a meeting with a Russian lawyer, not a government lawyer, but a Russian lawyer. I see that she was in the halls of Congress also. Somebody said that her visa or her passport to come into the country was approved by Attorney General Lynch. 0 happened from the meeting. And honestly, I think the press made a very big deal over something that really a lot of people would do. I've had many people call up, oh, gee, we have information on this factor or this person or, frankly, Hillary. That's very standard in politics. Politics is not the nicest business in the world.
President Trump in France being asked a question at the press conference there about Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with this Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya. This as we're getting more information about her. The Hill reports, and we've confirmed, the Russian lawyer who penetrated Donald Trump's inner circle was initially cleared into the United States by the Justice Department under extraordinary circumstances before she embarked on a lobbying campaign last year. This revelation means it was the Obama Justice Department that enabled the newest and most intriguing figure in the Russia-Trump investigation to enter the country without a visa. And we're learning more about her connections as time goes on. Let's bring in our panel. Michael Crowley, senior foreign affairs correspondent for Politico, editor-in-chief of Life Zet, Laura Ingram, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Charles.
Well, I'm not impressed by the story about the lawyer. I think it's a red herring the size of a whale. She was a pawn. It doesn't change the central fact in the scandal. The scandal is that the email received from an intermediary by Donald Trump Jr. said that a Russian government lawyer, the president is wrong, he was not a lawyer, a Russian government lawyer, would be coming with dirt on Hillary and that the Kremlin was supporting his campaign, and that the Crown prosecutor, that's a misnomer, the state prosecutor in the Kremlin had a trove of documents that they would offer. That's the story. I don't think it's illegal. I don't think anybody is claiming that this is illegal, but it does. The one thing it does, it totally undermines a 6-month story from the White House, to which I was sympathetic, that there wasn't any collusion. This was a bungled collusion. This was amateurish collusion. This was Keystone Cops collusion, but it doesn't change the fact that it was attempted collusion, and it undoes the White House story completely.
Laura.
I don't think it undoes the White House story completely unless you think that Donald Trump himself knew about this meeting, knew about the email. I know there's a lot of speculation on other cable networks that's obsessed with the story 24/7, that in fact there are all sorts of logical leaps to make from the email that Donald Trump Jr. received to the short meeting to Donald Trump's statements about emails and so forth. But I don't think we have those facts yet. I'll be interested to know those facts. But I don't think anyone has really clean hands here. We know for a fact, as Politico has reported, that Alexandra Chalupa, who is a former White House staffer and DNC official, worked with the Ukrainian sources to get dirt on Donald Trump, shared that information, according to Politico, and this was all, I guess, a lot of this dumped by WikiLeaks, shared this information with a willing Clinton campaign. Everyone seems to be willing to benefit from dirt being spread around, or attempted to be spread around, or trafficked as dirt, even though it wasn't, by unsavory sources. I don't think it looks good to take a meeting with someone who says they're working on behalf of the Russian government. I agree with Alan Dershowitz. It is not treason. It is not illegal. But it does demonstrate how difficult and precarious it is to get involved in the political world when your experience really is limited to New York real estate. It's a different game, and it's a different deal.
Listening to Senator Warner, they don't have a lot of answers in this, at least not ones they're going to talk about.
No, that's right, and it's frustrating for everyone involved because the nature of this investigation means that there's not that much they can say publicly. These leaks come out and we get little pieces of the puzzle without knowing what the big picture is. But, you know, I do think that Charles put his finger on the central point here, which Donald Trump did not address, which is, you know, what was the reaction to an email that says there is a Russian government campaign plan to help your campaign, and the meeting might have gone nowhere. This lady might not have been an effective emissary if she was one, but the question is, what was the response? And I think the best defense, I suppose, would be the one that Laura hinted at, which is that these people were novices in this arena. They were real estate professionals. The problem is that falls down when you get to Paul Manafort being in the room. And to the degree that Paul Manafort had read through the email and had seen that language. Now, I understand he says he didn't.
The top part of the email, of course.
Okay, so maybe. But it also just speaks to the fact that the Trump campaign was not a highly professionalized one, and you're seeing it manifesting even now that they've come into government, slow to staff up the government, a lot of confusion, no end to problems to the fact that this was not a professional campaign.
Charles, Newt Gingrich, defending the president, says that the media and Democrats are essentially rushing past a bank robbery to get Trump administration officials for jaywalking. In other words, all of the stuff with Hillary Clinton and all of the hammering the phone and destroying the emails and whitewashing the server and the Clinton the Clinton Foundation and all of their interactions. He says they're driving by a bank robbery trying to get somebody for jaywalking.
Well, there's one salient fact here. Hillary is a private citizen. She lost the election. All of this could be true if there are people who want to go after her to put her in jail, lock her up. Okay, I have no objection whatsoever. The fact is that the president, Mr. Trump, and this is an accusation that's been made against him, his own nominee for the FBI has said that what Donald Trump Jr. did, what the campaign did, essentially the top three officials in the campaign, is something that was wrong and that they should instead have called the authorities. That's the salient fact. You can have all of this other stuff.
But beyond apologizing, what are you going to get Where is the underlying crime that they're going after here?
I said at the beginning, I don't think there's a crime of collusion, but I think what you do have is 6 months of deception from the White House, either advertent or inadvertent, perhaps. If nobody knew about this meeting, I'm assuming the president did not know about the meeting, but they had said for 6 months they had no meetings, they had no interaction. They had nothing. Here in black and white is an admission of, we want to help your campaign. We have stuff on Hillary. The state prosecutor in the Kremlin has stuff, and the response is, I love it. That contradicts the whole line of defense that the Trump campaign.
Whether they got the stuff or didn't.
Whether it's a crime or not is a totally different issue. I'm willing to concede it's not a criminal act, but it's certainly an unethical act.
I want to turn really quickly to his reception in France, the interaction with the French president, both of them glowing about each other, about their countries, about their relationships. Kind of a different take.
Yeah, it was something. I think it's good for him to stay on the road, especially right now, this Russia story continues to bubble up. We keep hearing that the Europeans don't like him, he's really unpopular, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you know, a lot of our friends in the media were saying a lot of similar things about President Reagan in the 1980s. I'm not saying Donald Trump is President Reagan, but I am saying, of course, that American presidents have often, when they stand for American interests first, they have often gotten rocky receptions in Europe. That having been said, I think Donald Trump has actually had some great interactions with foreign leaders, again, which is swept under the rug by a media obsessed with, like, Pavlovian obsession with this story about Russia, to the exclusion of all else. Macron stood with Vladimir Putin and had a joint press conference a few weeks back when Putin visited. Of course, Angela Merkel very tight with Putin because of the Nord Stream pipeline and the gas that they need in Europe. And I think it was a good day for President Trump. We'll see what comes of it.
He even hinted that there's something could happen with respect to the Paris Accord, the climate change deal. We'll see what happens. Next up, Senate Republicans take another shot at getting rid of Obamacare.
After extensive consultations across the conference, numerous meetings with constituents, and intensive conversations with members, our conference has updated last month's Better Care discussion draft with additional provisions to make it stronger.
This legislation, President Trump and I believe, is the right bill at the right time to begin the end of Obamacare.
Okay. If this is the bill, are you on board?
Yes. It's not the ideal bill I'd like to pass. It does represent a bill that reflects the concerns expressed across the conference. I think that's how we actually come together and honor our promise to repeal Obamacare.
Do you think the new version is better than the old version?
No, I think it's worse. Really, I think we're keeping Obamacare as much as anything, and that's not our promise.
Well, the new version for the Senate GOP health care repeal and replace bill is out. It will be scored by the Congressional Budget Office, expected to get that Monday. But so far, Senators Rand Paul, you just heard him there, it's worse, according to him, and Susan Collins are definitive no's for very different reasons on this bill. The Republicans can only afford to lose one more vote, and it all comes crashing down. We're back with the panel. Michael, they have to get over the hurdle of actually getting the bill to the floor first.
Yeah, it's uphill sledding and it must be so frustrating. I mean, if you flash back after the election, you know, you have strong Republican majorities in the House and the Senate, Republican president. If there's anything this party is unified on, it's getting rid of Obamacare. This should have been an easy one for them. And here we are, midsummer. No other significant accomplishments. They've already had the victory party for the House bill, but now it looks really premature, and it's just got to be incredibly frustrating that with all these institutional advantages they had, they might be hitting a dead end on this one, and will go home for summer recess empty-handed legislatively.
This alternative is put forward by Lindsey Graham and also Senator Cassidy. Take a listen to Senator Graham on this alternative.
It's going to be about $500 billion of taxes in place that will not be repealed. We're going to take that $500 billion and through some kind of formula, give it to the states and say the following. You can't build a school with it. You can't build a road with it. You got to spend it on health care. You got to take care of sick people. But if you want to repair Obamacare, you can repair it. If you want to replace it, you can replace it.
So, Laura, giving the power to the states, these governors then take the control.
It's modestly better, but I think in the end we found out that Obamacare was so entangled in so many aspects of our regulatory lives and obviously healthcare itself that doing what needed to be done was really going to be unpleasant. And the states that accepted expansion of Medicaid became like, addicts. They were addicts. They want more of the federal dollars flowing back to the states, even Republican governors like Kasich. And there's no methadone clinic for this. I mean, the numbers aren't adding up. We're not going to bring down the cost of health care with this bill. I think Rand Paul is right. But do you deliver something to the president's desk that he can sign so you can say you've done something? I don't think it's going to bring down the cost of health care. I don't think it's going to happen with what Senator Graham is proposing, but I got to give him credit for at least trying to come up with something.
Charles.
I thought the best proposal was from Senator Cruz, which apparently is going to be incorporated in the main bill. There are going to be all kinds of amendments. It could go up or go down. Essentially what it does, Republicans have come to a consensus that Obama won on the issue of the right to health care, particularly people with expensive pre-existing conditions. That has to be socialized. What happens in Obamacare is that the young and the healthy subsidize it by paying outrageous premiums, and thus the young don't sign up, have to be coerced, take the penalty, and the whole system is in free fall because the young healthy aren't going to sign up for deals that are lousy. What the Cruz proposal does is it socializes. Essentially, it says it ends up being paid by taxpayers, that expensive treatment for the old and the sick. That's the way it ought to be done. This is not a panacea. It's not a great improvement, but it is an improvement. And I think Rand Paul is doing a real disservice to conservatism. This is the perfect being the enemy of the good. If this does not succeed, and it looks like it probably won't, it's all going to be in the hands of Chuck Schumer, and the Republicans are going to end up bailing out Obamacare. There's no other way.
And that's fascinating. A lot of talk, Michael, about what it does to the Republican Party, what it does to the brand heading to 2018. I want to put up this picture. I didn't put it up the other day from Monday in the Oval Office. Evangelical ministers praying for and with the president got a lot of attention on social media. You look at evangelicals, for example, they're pretty lockstep with this administration, basically because of the Supreme Court. But it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, it will. It's always been a surprising element of Donald Trump as a political figure that he has had support from that community. A lot of reasons intuitively why you might not expect it. I have noticed that since he took office, he's referred frequently to God and religion. I suspect a little more than he did in his private life before he was a candidate. Mike Pence, I'm sure, helps with that also, as in that community. It's also sort of a play from the playbook for any president facing scandal and deep trouble. I mean, remember that Bill Clinton was sort of constantly surrounded by ministers during the Lewinsky scandal talking about sin and redemption. So it's a little bit of a part of life in Washington, but certainly that is helping to support him right now.
All right, panel, thank you. We'll see how it falls out when we come back. A senator who always pays his debts, especially when it comes to college football.
You do all this research.